Let's take a look now at the climactic verse of the 70-week prophecy. And he shall enforce the covenant, and the he is a pronoun. Who is the identity of he? Very simple grammar. What's the antecedent? The previous he was the prince that shall come. Some people try to make this the Messiah, and they come up with a concept that doesn't actually fit the text, creates other problems. This is not the Messiah. The prince that shall come shall enforce the covenant with the many, that's his praise for Israel, for 1 week. This is that final week. This is the 70th week of Daniel. And in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate, even till the consummation. And that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. So what on earth is all this about? First of all, understand the he, the prince that shall come, is the bad guy, the coming prince. He apparently will enforce the covenant. Some people would translate that, he signs a treaty. It doesn't say that. It's actually he enforces a covenant. So it might be, he might make a treaty, or he may simply be enforcing the Palestinian covenant, that is, giving Israel the right to the land. It could be that simple. He promises to do that for a 7-year period. What defines the 70th week is the period of the enforcement of this covenant, or the confirming of that covenant. Enforce or confirm, same equivalent phrase. But in the middle of that 7-year period, he by then is so powerful, he ignores his commitment, and he causes the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. Sacrifice and the oblation implies, obviously, that there is a temple standing, and they have returned to dedicate that temple and reestablish the animal sacrifices. And what's implied here is it may not be the subject of that treaty, but as at least a byproduct of it, that they're allowed to sacrifice, go back to the Levitical system. See, the great dilemma of the Jew today is he has no remedy for sin. Leviticus says, without the shedding of blood, there's no remission of sins. Where can they shed blood? They do not have a temple. They do not have the opportunity to remedy their sin. And yet they have a tremendous consciousness of sin. So they're in a real dilemma. That's what caused at the Council of Yamnia, this whole Judaism got, in a sense, redefined to what we would call Talmudic Judaism, which is a far cry from Mosaic Judaism. And the dilemma they face is they have no temple. How can they practice the law in its real sense? One of the dreams is to get the temple back and to reestablish this, and apparently they are able to do this, maybe in part because of this covenant. But in any case, by the middle of this covenant, this guy, this leader, causes the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. So it's a repeat, if you will, of the circumstance of Antiochus Epiphanes of 167 BC, where he not only destroyed all the Torah, he slaughtered pigs on the holy altar, but he also erected an idol in the Holy of Holies. And that was called the abomination of desolation. And that's what triggered the Maccabean revolt, which led to the Hasmoneans and all that. It took them 3 years and so forth. Well, what's interesting here, Jesus, to his disciples in that original briefing, makes reference to the abomination of desolation. But that's a historical thing that happened 2 centuries earlier. But he's speaking of it prophetically. What is he talking about? A repeat of that kind of an event. It's never happened. It's interesting when you study this, under Emperor Caligula, he ordered from Rome that his image be established in the Holy of Holies. This is about 140-something AD. Petronius, the general in charge in those days, this is after Pilate and all this is later, obviously, century after the crucifixion, knew that if he tried to do that, there would be another repeat, there'd be an uprising. So he refused to follow his orders. When Caligula finds out that he didn't do it, he sends an order for Petronius to be killed. But then Caligula dies within 2 weeks, and by a mix-up of messages at sea, the message of Caligula's death arrives in Judea before the order to have Petronius killed, so he gets off the hook. But what's interesting here is to see God intervene, because then shortly thereafter the temple is destroyed, and the temple was destroyed under warfare conditions. They didn't erect any altars and worship them. They were fighting for their lives, both sides. And so the temple is destroyed. Now there can't be That in order to have an abomination of desolation, you've got to have the temple standing. We know the temple will be rebuilt because Paul, John, and Jesus all make reference to it standing at the end times. Anyway, and Daniel does too, I guess. I should say 4. Okay, let's keep going here. Which prince? The antecedent, the princes shall come, is required by grammar. You also, something else that's kind of interesting, if you study the imperial succession after Nero, General Galba accedes to the throne, but he's assassinated. Otho is unfit and he committed suicide. General Vespasian, the father of Titus Vespasian, Titus Vespasian was the captain in charge of the siege in 70 AD, but his father is called to fulfill the vacancy. So Titus himself, even though he's the commander of the Roman legions under the fall of Jerusalem, he is a prince. He is the heir to his father, is sitting on the Emperor Vespasian. You follow me? And by the way, another small point, there are some authorities that believe that Titus could have been a descendant of Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes was, of course, a Syrian Greek. But as the Roman Empire starts to take succession over the Greeks, many of the royal families intermarried. And there are some that speculate that Titus may have been a descendant. He could claim descendancy from Antiochus Epiphanes. Don't know if that's true. It wouldn't surprise me, though, if the Antichrist, when he does show up, will have some surprising credentials, because he's going to pass himself off in pretty sterling terms to the whole world. We also incur this times, and the dividing of time. Times, remember, we talked about that's a dual. So time is singular, times is a dual, and half a time. It's a way of saying 3.5. And that will occur in Daniel 12. It occurred in Daniel 7. It'll occur in Daniel 12 again. But here in Daniel 27, we have the midst of the week, the 3.5 years. And it's also called 42 months twice in Revelation 12 and 13. And it's also called in Revelation and in Daniel 12, when we get there, 1,260 days. The main point is each half of the 7-year period is called half of a week, called 3.5 years, time times the dividing of time, 42 months, 1260, those are all equivalent phrases. The Holy Spirit, this is probably, in fact, unquestionably, this is the most documented period of time in the entire Bible, Old and New Testament. These references are in Old and New Testament together. This peculiar 7-year period, the last half of which is the Great Tribulation, is there. And the midst of the week, dating to 27 and so forth. So, let's talk a little about this abomination of desolation. You know, it's interesting. In John chapter 10, verse 22, right in the middle of a discourse, John happens to mention it was in Jerusalem, the Feast of Dedication, and it was winter. This is one of those little tidbits, if you're reading, you just skip over. Don't get stumble on this. But if you double back and they say, wait a minute, how can it be the Feast of Dedication in winter? That doesn't work. What's Feast of Dedication? Solomon's Temple? From 1 Kings 8, that was in the autumn, not the winter. Well, what about Zerubbabel, the second temple, as we call it? Zerubbabel's temple. That was in the spring, according to Ephesians 6. Ezra 6. And the rededication is in winter on the 25th of Kislev, and what this is Hanukkah. It shocks many Christians to realize that Hanukkah is endorsed by the Gospel of John, chapter 10, verse 22. Why did the Holy Spirit call our attention to the... See, Hanukkah is not a feast of Moses. It's not in the Old Testament, in the usual sense. It celebrates an event that occurred, what was we say, between the Testaments, in 167 BC. But it's interesting because what the Holy Spirit's saying, we need to understand the events surrounding Antiochus Epiphanes, because it leads to an event that Jesus will idiomatically refer to as happening in the future. And so as we go to this period and look at this area, we have the Septuagint right in the middle of the Greek period, and we have this strange period under Antiochus Epiphanes, which is, again, 2 centuries before Christ's use of that phrase. So we are dependent upon the history of Antiochus Epiphanes to understand what that really involved. And so we went through all this in our previous chapter when we studied that, but he made the Torah reading punishable by death. He slaughtered a sow on the altar. He erected an idol to Zeus on the Holy of Holies, which is defined as the abomination of desolation. And that led, of course, to the Maccabean revolt. It took 3 years to throw off the Syrian Empire, or the Syrian Greeks, the Seleucid Empire. And he rededicated, and by the way,